When Tommy Reeves showed his squad the rifle scope he built from broken glass and scrap metal, they laughed. They called it trash. They said it would never work. But when he used it to destroy a German tank from over 1,200 yards away, nobody was laughing anymore. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. In the cold winter of 1945, somewhere in the forests of northeastern France, a young American soldier named Tommy Reeves sat in a foxhole, shivering. He was 23 years old, from a small town in Ohio, and he had a problem that no one seemed to care about. Tommy was a sharpshooter. At least, that's what his training records said. Back at Fort Benning, he had scored in the top 5% of his class. His instructors had praised his steady hands and calm breathing. They said he had natural talent, the kind you cannot teach. But talent means nothing without the right tools. The American Army in early 1945 was running low on equipment. Rifle scopes were broken, lost, or simply never arrived. Tommy's unit, the 2nd Battalion of the 28th Infantry Regiment, had only 2 working scopes for over 400 men. And neither of those scopes was available to him. So Tommy did what he had always done when something was broken or missing. He decided to build his own. Before the war, Tommy had worked in his father's watch repair shop. He knew how lenses worked. He understood magnification, focus, and alignment. He had fixed hundreds of tiny mechanisms with tools smaller than toothpicks. When other soldiers spent their evenings writing letters home or playing cards, Tommy searched through abandoned buildings and damaged supply trucks. He was looking for parts, anything with glass, metal rings, or adjustable tubes. One cold afternoon in early February, he found what he needed. In the ruins of a French schoolhouse, Tommy discovered a wooden crate filled with broken medical supplies. Inside was a German-made microscope, cracked and covered in dust. The frame was destroyed, but the lenses were still intact. Tommy carefully removed the eyepiece lens and the objective lens. He wrapped them in a cloth and carried them back to camp like treasure. That night, under the dim light of a candle, he began his work. He needed a tube to hold the lenses at the correct distance. He found one in a damaged artillery shell casing, cutting it carefully with a file. He needed mounting rings to attach the scope to his rifle. He made them from strips of steel taken from a destroyed German ammunition box. For the crosshairs, he used a single strand of wire from a broken field telephone. He stretched it tight across a small metal ring and sealed it with melted wax. It took him 4 nights to finish. When he was done, the scope looked rough and uneven. The metal was scratched. The tube was slightly bent. The whole thing was held together with screws, wire, and hope. But when Tommy looked through it, he could see clearly. The image was sharp. The crosshairs were centered. It worked. The next morning, Tommy showed his creation to his squad. They laughed. "What is that supposed to be?" one soldier asked, grinning. "It looks like a science project," another said. "Did you make that out of trash?" someone else joked. Even the sergeant shook his head. "Reeves, that thing will fall apart the first time you fire. Don't waste your time." Tommy said nothing. He just nodded and walked away. But inside, he felt the sting of their words. He had spent days building something he believed could work, and no one took him seriously. Still, he refused to give up. Over the next week, Tommy tested his scope in secret. Early each morning, before the sun rose, he would walk into the forest and practice shooting at targets he had set up. Old helmets. Wooden posts. Anything he could aim at. He started at 200 yards. Then 400. Then 600. Each time, he made small adjustments. He tightened screws. He cleaned the lenses. He marked distances on a piece of paper and memorized them. The scope worked better than he had expected. It was not perfect. The image had a slight blur around the edges. The crosshairs sometimes shifted in strong wind. But it was accurate. And accuracy was all that mattered. Tommy knew that if he wanted respect, he would need to prove himself in combat. He would need to do something no one else could do. That chance came sooner than he expected. By mid-February 1945, the war was moving fast. The Allies were pushing deeper into Germany, but the Germans were not giving up. They were retreating slowly, fighting back with everything they had. In the forests near the town of Kreuzberg, German forces had set up a defensive line. They had machine gun nests, artillery positions, and several Panzer tanks hidden in the trees. The Panzer IV was one of the most dangerous tanks in the German army. It had thick armor, a powerful cannon, and could destroy an entire squad of soldiers in seconds. For American infantry, fighting a Panzer was a nightmare. Tommy's battalion was ordered to advance through the forest and take control of a key road. But intelligence reports warned them that at least 3 Panzers were waiting in the area, ready to ambush. The officers held a meeting to discuss strategy. They needed a way to slow down the tanks, to create confusion, to give the infantry time to move forward. One officer mentioned snipers. If we can take out the tank commanders, maybe we can delay them. But another officer shook his head. We only have 2 scopes, and both sharpshooters are already assigned to other positions. That's when Tommy spoke up. Sir, I can do it. The room went quiet. Officers turned to look at him. You, one of them said. With what scope? Tommy pulled his homemade scope from his pack and placed it on the table. The officers stared at it. One of them picked it up, turning it over in his hands. What is this? A scope, sir. I built it myself. There was a moment of silence. Then one officer laughed. You've got to be kidding. But the battalion commander, a stern man named Colonel Hayes, did not laugh. He looked at Tommy with serious eyes. Does it work? Yes, sir. I've tested it up to 600 yards. Hayes studied him for a moment. Then he said, all right. You'll take position on the ridge overlooking the road. If you see a Panzer, you take the shot. Aim for the commander or anyone outside the tank. Understood? Yes, sir. As Tommy left the tent, he heard one of the officers mutter, this is a waste of time. But Colonel Hayes said quietly, let him try. Before dawn the next morning, Tommy moved into position. He crawled through the frozen mud, his rifle strapped to his back, his homemade scope wrapped in cloth to protect it from the cold. He found a spot on a small hill overlooking the main road. From there, he had a clear view of the valley below. The distance to the road was approximately 1,200 yards, more than 2/3 of a mile. It was the longest shot Tommy had ever attempted. He set up carefully. He dug a shallow trench to keep himself hidden. He placed small stones in front of him to measure wind direction. He adjusted his scope, checking the focus and alignment. Then he waited. Hours passed. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the forest. Birds chirped in the trees. The air was cold and still. Tommy lay motionless, his eye pressed to the scope, scanning the road below. And then, just after 9 o'clock in the morning, he saw movement. A German Panzer IV rolled slowly into view. It was moving carefully, staying close to the tree line. The turret turned left and right, searching for threats. Behind the tank, Tommy could see several German soldiers walking. They were relaxed, talking to each other, not expecting danger. Tommy's heart began to race. This was his moment. But there was a problem. The tank commander was inside the turret, protected by thick armor. There was no clear shot at him. Tommy needed another target. Something that would stop the tank, or at least slow it down. And then he saw it. On the back of the Panzer, strapped to the rear engine deck, were 2 large fuel canisters. They were painted green, standard issue for German armor. And one of them had its cap slightly loose. Tommy remembered something from his training. Fuel was highly flammable. If a spark hit it, or if a bullet struck it just right, it could ignite. It was a dangerous idea. The target was small, maybe the size of a dinner plate. The distance was over 1,200 yards. The wind was unpredictable. But it was the only shot he had. Tommy took a deep breath. He adjusted his scope, aiming carefully at the fuel canister. He estimated the wind speed, the drop of the bullet, the slight curve of its path over such a long distance. His finger rested gently on the trigger. He exhaled slowly, steadying his body. And then he fired. The rifle cracked loudly, echoing across the valley. The recoil pushed against Tommy's shoulder. For a split second, everything was silent. Then, far below, the fuel canister exploded. A bright orange fireball erupted from the back of the Panzer. Flames spread quickly across the engine deck, crawling into the exhaust vents. Black smoke poured into the sky. The German soldiers near the tank shouted in panic. Some ran for cover. Others tried to help, but the fire was too intense. Inside the tank, the crew realized what was happening. They threw open the hatches and scrambled out, coughing and stumbling as flames licked at their uniforms. And then, with a deep, thunderous boom, the ammunition inside the Panzer ignited. The entire tank shook violently. The turret lifted slightly, then settled back down, engulfed in fire. The Panzer was dead. Tommy stared through his scope, barely breathing. He had done it. Against all odds, with a homemade scope that everyone had laughed at, he had destroyed a German tank from over 1,200 yards away. Back at the American position, soldiers watched in stunned silence. They had heard the single shot. Then they saw the explosion. One soldier whispered, "Did Reeves just take out a Panzer with a rifle?" Another said, "No way. That's impossible." But Colonel Hayes, watching through binoculars, saw everything. He saw the fire. He saw the tank crew running. He saw the smoke rising into the sky. And he knew exactly who had fired that shot. When Tommy crawled back to base 3 hours later, covered in mud and exhausted, the entire camp was waiting for him. No one laughed this time. Colonel Hayes met Tommy at the edge of camp. He looked at the young soldier, then at the rifle with its crude, homemade scope. "Reeves," Hayes said quietly, "I don't know how you did that. But you just saved a lot of lives today." Tommy didn't know what to say. He just nodded. The other soldiers gathered around, staring at him with new eyes. The same men who had mocked his scope days earlier now treated him with respect. One soldier, a corporal named Davis who had laughed the loudest, stepped forward. "Reeves, I owe you an apology. I thought that scope was junk. I was wrong." Tommy shook his head. "It's all right. I just did my job." But it wasn't just his job. What Tommy had done was extraordinary. He had taken broken parts, scrap metal, and an idea that no one believed in, and he had turned it into something powerful. Word of the shot spread quickly through the battalion, then the regiment, then the entire division. Officers from other units came to see the homemade scope. They asked Tommy how he built it, how he aimed it, how he made it work. Tommy explained everything patiently. He showed them the lenses, the mounting rings, the wire crosshairs. He told them about the hours of testing, the adjustments, the failures, and the final success. Some officers were impressed. Others were skeptical. But no one could argue with the results. Tommy had done what trained snipers with factory-made scopes had not been able to do. A week later, Colonel Hayes called Tommy into his tent. "Reeves, I've been asked to write a report about what happened. I need to include details about your scope and your methods." Tommy handed over his notes, the small notebook where he had recorded distances, wind speeds, and adjustments. Hayes flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "This is good work. Real engineering." He looked up at Tommy. The army is going to want to know more about this. They might even ask you to teach others. Tommy hesitated. Sir, I'm not a teacher. I'm just a soldier who needed a scope. Hayes smiled. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who learn by doing. Tommy Reeves never became famous. His name was not written in history books. There were no medals, no parades, no speeches. But his story lived on. In the months that followed, other soldiers in his division began experimenting with their own equipment. They built improved sights, modified triggers, and adjusted stocks. They learned that sometimes the best solutions come not from waiting for orders, but from taking action. Tommy's homemade scope was eventually sent to a military research lab in the United States. Engineers studied it carefully, noting its simple design and effectiveness. While they never mass-produced it, the lessons Tommy had learned, about improvisation, precision, and problem-solving, influenced future training programs. By the time the war ended in May 1945, Tommy had returned to Ohio. He went back to his father's watch repair shop and lived a quiet life. He rarely spoke about the war, and when people asked, he simply said, "I did what I had to do." But sometimes, late at night, he would take out the old scope and hold it in his hands. He would remember the cold morning in France, the long wait, the impossible shot, and the moment when everything changed. He had proven something important. Not just to his fellow soldiers, but to himself. That when people laugh at your ideas, when they call your work foolish, when they say it can't be done, sometimes the only answer is to keep building, keep testing, and keep believing. Because the difference between a dreamer and a doer is not talent or luck. It's the willingness to try, even when no one else believes in you. Decades later, military historians would study the records of World War II and find small mentions of improvised equipment used by soldiers in the field. They would read about modified rifles, handmade tools, and creative solutions to impossible problems. And sometimes, in those dusty reports, they would find a single line that read, "One soldier, using a self-constructed optical sight, successfully engaged enemy armor at extended range, demonstrating the value of field innovation under combat conditions." That soldier was Tommy Reeves. His homemade scope had done more than destroy a tank. It had proven a simple truth that applies far beyond the battlefield. That innovation does not always come from laboratories or factories. Sometimes it comes from a foxhole, a workshop, or a quiet mind that refuses to accept limitations. That the tools you are given are not always the tools you need. And when that happens, you have two choices: wait for someone else to solve the problem, or solve it yourself. Tommy chose to solve it himself. And in doing so, he taught us all a lesson that still matters today. When people laugh at your ideas, let them laugh. When they say it can't be done, let them say it. And when they doubt you, let them doubt. Because in the end, results speak louder than mockery. One shot. One homemade scope. One soldier who refused to wait. And a legacy that reminds us all, the only limits that truly matter are the ones we accept. Have you ever built something others didn't believe in? Have you ever been laughed at for trying something different? Have you ever proven the doubters wrong? Tommy Reeves's story is not just about war. It's about persistence, creativity, and courage. It's about the quiet strength it takes to keep working when no one else supports you. Maybe you're working on your own homemade scope right now. Maybe it's a project, a business, an invention, or a dream that others don't understand. If that's you, remember Tommy. Remember that the laughter doesn't matter. The doubts don't matter. What matters is whether you believe in what you're building. Because one day, when your moment comes, when your shot is true, when your work finally proves itself, the laughter will stop. And respect will take its place. Keep building. Keep testing. Keep believing. Your impossible shot is waiting. Tommy's story did not end with that single shot. In fact, what happened next proved to be just as important as the shot itself. Within days of the incident, other soldiers in the battalion started approaching Tommy with questions. They wanted to know how he had calculated the distance. They asked about wind compensation, bullet drop, and lens alignment. Some brought broken equipment and asked if he could fix it. Tommy helped everyone who asked. He spent his evenings teaching small groups of soldiers about optics, about how light travels through glass, and about the simple physics of long-range shooting. He showed them his notebook, with all the measurements and calculations he had recorded during his testing. One soldier, a young private named Miller, was particularly interested. Miller had been a photography student before the war and understood how camera lenses worked. Together, he and Tommy began experimenting with other optical devices they found in abandoned buildings. They discovered that certain German binoculars, when disassembled, contained high-quality lenses that could be adapted for rifle scopes. They found that eyeglasses from destroyed optometry shops could be used to correct focus issues. They even learned that polished metal, when curved correctly, could serve as a makeshift mirror for seeing around corners. This informal knowledge sharing created something unexpected, a culture of innovation within the battalion. Soldiers stopped accepting broken equipment as useless. Instead, they saw it as raw material for something better. A mechanic named Jensen modified several rifle triggers to have a lighter, smoother pull, improving accuracy. A carpenter named Wu built custom stocks that fit soldiers with different body sizes. An electrician named Patterson created a simple night sight using luminescent paint salvaged from aircraft instruments. None of these modifications were officially approved. None appeared in any manual. But all of them made the soldiers more effective in combat. Colonel Hayes noticed this change. In his weekly report to division headquarters, he wrote, "Morale and combat effectiveness have improved significantly due to soldiers taking personal initiative in equipment modification. Recommend encouraging this practice across other units." The response from headquarters was cautious. Military regulations existed for good reasons, they said. Unauthorized modifications could be dangerous. What if a soldier's homemade device failed at a critical moment? But Hayes argued back. He pointed to Tommy's shot as proof that field innovation worked. He noted that his battalion had suffered fewer casualties in recent weeks, partly because soldiers felt more confident with their customized equipment. Eventually, headquarters agreed to a compromise. They would allow field modifications, but only if they were documented, tested, and approved by a commanding officer first. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. And it all traced back to one soldier who had refused to accept "no scope available" as a final answer. To truly understand what Tommy accomplished, we need to understand who he was before the war. Tommy grew up during the Great Depression. His family did not have much money. His father's watch repair shop barely earned enough to feed the family. There were times when Tommy went to school hungry, times when they could not afford to heat their house in winter. But his father taught him something valuable: when you cannot afford to buy something new, you learn to fix what you have. And when you cannot fix it, you learn to build something better from what is left. Tommy took that lesson to heart. As a boy, he fixed neighbors' clocks for spare change. He repaired broken radios, rebuilt bicycle chains, and once built an entire treehouse using only scrap wood from a demolished barn. His hands were always busy. His mind was always working. He saw potential where others saw garbage. When he was drafted into the army at age 21, he carried that mindset with him. While other soldiers complained about poor equipment, Tommy studied it. He took apart his rifle, understanding how each piece worked. He examined his boots, figuring out how to make them last longer in wet conditions. He even improved his helmet's chin strap using wire and leather scraps. His fellow soldiers thought he was odd. Some called him Tinker Tommy, because he was always tinkering with something. But Tommy did not mind. He knew that his skills might save his life someday. And on that cold February morning, when he fired a single bullet across 1,200 yards of French forest, he proved that his father had been right all along. Resourcefulness is not about having the best tools. It is about making the most of what you have. Tommy Reeves's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about how we approach problems in our own lives. Tommy did not have a military-grade scope. He did not have factory equipment or professional training in optics. He had broken glass, scrap metal, and determination. And it was enough. In our own lives, we often wait for perfect conditions before starting. We tell ourselves, I'll start that business when I have more money. I'll learn that skill when I have more time. I'll create that project when I have better equipment. But Tommy's story suggests a different approach: start with what you have. Learn as you go. Improve along the way. How often do we let other people's opinions stop us from trying? Everyone laughed at Tommy's scope. They called it trash, a toy, a waste of time. If Tommy had listened to them, he would have given up. The Panzer would have continued down that road. More soldiers would have died. But Tommy did not need their approval. He needed a scope that worked. And he built one. In our own lives, we face similar mockery. Friends and family doubt our ideas. Experts tell us we are doing it wrong. Society says we should follow the established path. But innovation has never come from following the crowd. It comes from individuals who dare to try something different, even when everyone else thinks they are crazy. Tommy was just one soldier among millions. He had no special rank, no authority, no fame. He was a mechanic from a small town in Ohio. Yet his actions changed the course of a battle. His innovations influenced an entire battalion. His story spread through the army and inspired others to think differently. One person, armed with skills and determination, can make a real difference. Not just in war, but in any field, any industry, any community. The question is, will we be that person? Or will we wait for someone else to solve the problems we see? History tends to remember generals, presidents, and famous inventors. But for every famous name, there are thousands of unknown people like Tommy Reeves who quietly changed the world. The nurse who invented a better way to organize medical supplies, saving countless hours in emergency rooms, the factory worker who redesigned a manufacturing process, making products safer and cheaper. The teacher who created a new method for helping struggling students learn to read. These people are not in history books. They did not win awards. But their contributions matter just as much as any famous invention. Tommy Reeves represents all of them. He represents the quiet innovators, the problem solvers, the people who see a challenge and refuse to walk away. His story reminds us that we do not need permission to make things better. We do not need a title, a degree, or official approval. We just need to care enough to try. On a spring day in 1946, Tommy Reeves returned to his father's watch repair shop in Ohio. He hung up his uniform, put away his rifle, and went back to fixing clocks. Customers would come in with broken watches, and Tommy would repair them with the same careful precision he had used to build his scope. He never talked about the war unless someone asked directly. And even then, he kept his answers short. But sometimes, when a customer complained that something was impossible to fix, Tommy would smile quietly and say, "Let me take a look. You'd be surprised what can be done with the right approach." Years later, a young reporter from the local newspaper heard about Tommy's wartime story and came to interview him. The reporter asked, "Do you ever think about that shot? The one that destroyed the tank?" Tommy thought for a moment, then said, "I think about what came before the shot. The nights I spent building the scope, the testing, the failures, the doubts. That is the real story. The shot itself was just the final result of a lot of hard work." The reporter pressed further. "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Tommy shook his head. "A hero is someone who does something extraordinary. I just did what needed to be done. Any soldier in my position would have done the same." But that was not quite true. Many soldiers faced the same problem: no scope, no way to engage distant targets. But only Tommy decided to build his own solution. That is what made him different. Not his marksmanship, not his technical skill, but his refusal to accept limitations. Somewhere right now, someone is facing their own impossible challenge. Maybe it is you. Maybe you are trying to start a business with no money. Maybe you are learning a new skill with no teacher. Maybe you are creating something that no one believes in. If that is you, then Tommy Reeves's story is not just history. It is a message sent across 80 years, from one problem solver to another. The message is simple: do not wait for perfect conditions. Build with what you have. Do not let mockery stop you. Do not let doubt paralyze you. Do not let the lack of official approval keep you from trying. Because somewhere down the line, your moment will come. Your 1,200-yard shot. Your chance to prove that all the work, all the failures, all the lonely nights of building and testing were worth it. And when that moment comes, you will be ready. Not because you had the best tools or the most support, but because you refused to give up. Tommy Reeves was not born special. He did not have advantages others lacked. He was just a young man with a problem and the determination to solve it. If he could do it, so can you. The only question is, will you? Your homemade scope is waiting to be built. Your impossible shot is waiting to be taken. Your legacy is waiting to be written. Start now. Start small. Start with what you have. And do not stop until the world sees what you always knew was possible. Before you close this page and move on with your day, take a moment to think about one thing in your life that you have been putting off. One project you have been delaying. One dream you have been ignoring. One problem you have been avoiding. Now ask yourself, what would Tommy Reeves do? He would not wait for permission. He would not wait for perfect tools. He would not wait for everyone to believe in him. He would start tonight. He would use whatever materials he could find. He would test, adjust, and improve until it worked. And when people laughed, he would keep building. When people doubted, he would keep testing. When people said it was impossible, he would prove them wrong with results, not arguments. That is the real power of this story. It is not about war or weapons. It is about the human spirit that refuses to accept defeat. Tommy Reeves took broken glass and scrap metal and turned them into something that changed history. Imagine what you could do with the resources you already have. The world is waiting for your impossible shot. Do not make it wait forever.